Next man up, 102.5 The Game. Nick Frazier filling in for Jake Lyman today as he is traveling. And alongside me is Parker Kelly behind the glass. Parker, it's, I guess, day 3 of no power for some people. We'll keep you updated on NES and what they have going for you today. But as for those, I guess, 165-something thousand, I'm a part of that group as well. So I'm roughing it as long as everybody else. Hopefully everybody's safe and warm. If you have a local shelter to go to, please do that and get some warm food and warm drinks in your system. But Parker, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right. It is, I don't think I've ever seen an ice storm in Nashville as long as I've lived here this bad. The amount of people still without power, just in my apartment complex, all the trees that are down, it's wild. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, there are a few trees in my neighborhood, especially in my grandmother's front yard, in my backyard. There's like probably 4 or 5 uprooted trees. I mean, we're grabbing the roots and all from the ground. So it's pretty crazy. But yeah, hopefully everybody's staying safe. This is a odd winter storm. Hopefully this is the last of it for just the foreseeable future right now. But there might be some small cells coming up in the near future on Saturday, potentially. But hopefully that's not the case. But yeah, we're here to kind of give you more of a relaxed mental break from all of that craziness outside this world. This is what we have for sports. Obviously, Robert Saleh adding some more to his coaching staff, and we'll have his introductory press conference Thursday. That was moved from Wednesday to Thursday, and plenty more from the Titans front. And hopefully, they might have an offensive coordinator to announce. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, the OC search has been really interesting. I know this was a hot topic of conversation yesterday, waiting for Brian Daboll, Arthur Smith getting hired by Ohio State, Bobby Slowick getting promoted with Miami, and then obviously Mike McDaniel officially signing with the Chargers. So now you're basically down to 3 guys, and that's Kingsbury, Stenavich, and obviously Daboll. So the longer this goes on, the more concerned I get that it's not going to be Daboll, just because he got another coaching interview with the Raiders. And I talked to TD yesterday. I'm like, is there any chance that Daboll legitimately turns down a head coaching opportunity to become the offensive coordinator for the Titans? And he basically said no shot. So he's kind of the apple of the eye right now and clearly the best candidate available.
Yeah, again, we'll get into more of this, and we may get into it a little bit now, but I'm a little concerned from a just general perspective for the Titans if they're just pushing all their chips in the middle for Brian Daboll. And it just seems like if they don't get their bell of the ball, which might be him, they might lose out on a solid opportunity. I'm here to tell you, I don't think so, but I'm concerned, but at the same time, I'm not, because the one name I've been kind of harping at for offensive coordinator job, or a head coaching job, is still on the market. And I think you know who that name is.
Yeah. And, it's the life lesson we all grew up learning. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I surely hope that's not the case with this one, because it seems like they have been waiting and you miss out on 3 very capable guys. So I surely hope that's not the case. I don't know how much longer you can afford to wait before these other guys. And I know Cliff Kingsbury is the guy you're referring to, right?
Yes.
I don't know how much longer you can wait before these other guys get snatched up, because there are still plenty of jobs available.
Yeah, there are plenty of jobs available. And you wonder, the Arizona gig, I think nobody wants that. I think that's just, if you lose out on an opportunity to be an OC or a head coach, that's like your last resort. And I'm sure nobody really wants that per se. But yeah, it's definitely slim pickings coming down to the Titans offensive coordinator position. And I'm curious, looking at, who the Titans recently just added to their staff. And, according to Ian Rappaport, the Titans were hiring Aaron Whitecotton, the new run game coordinator / defensive line coach, as a promotion. Whitecotton had multiple defensive coordinator interviews this cycle and has a unit of a top 5 in QB hits last season. Robert Saleh secures a big-time coach for the defensive front. I think that bodes well for the Tennessee Titans. You wonder how good the run game will be under him. And adding on to that, when they mentioned him as the D-line coach, the Tennessee Titans have a lot of, I'd say, core pieces to really make some disruptions attacking the quarterback. Everybody keeps talking about Robert Saleh's defense and how there's going to be a lot more one-on-one opportunities for if it's a Jeffrey Simmons or a Tavondre Sweat. I'm in the camp of this resets the clock for a guy like Femi Oladejo. I'm not sure what you think on that, Parker, but this is, again, another unproven talent in the second round. Could be a little bit of a stretch, but when you look at I guess the measurables of a player like Femi Oladejo. And yes, he had the injury last year. This is something he can rebound off of, and you're learning with a new coach.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of happy about the White Cotton hire because I know he's getting defensive coordinator interviews. I don't think he's necessarily ready for that. So the fact that he's being hired as the defensive line coach, one thing Dallas had on their defense that was good was the defensive line, especially. But, a large part of that is because of Micah Parsons. But even when Micah Parsons was traded to the Packers, you bring in Kenny Clark and then Quinnen Williams, defensive line was still really solid. So that is another asset that the Titans have. But for Femi Oladejo, to your point, the fact that Saleh runs a 4-3 would allow Oladejo to just purely rush instead of having to drop back in coverage as much if, they were still in the 3-4.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I could see that being a benefit for him. Absolutely.
And another, I guess, curveball to all this, and it's a good thing when it comes to the future aspects of this team. If it is the case, if Saleh doesn't work out, this could be a guy that could be elevated, or it might be Robert Saleh, not Robert Saleh, excuse me, Bones Fossil, one of those two. But the reason why I bring up why this is a good thing is you look at White Cotton, and I compare him to Jeff Ulbrich, because Jeff Ulbrich worked under Saleh, was a guy that learned a lot of Saleh's tendencies as a defensive coordinator when he was in New York. And this might be another succession plan. I'm not just saying if Saleh doesn't work out, but yet we even just mentioned it. White Cotton got a lot of DC interviews. If he just learns more under Robert Saleh, this could be another hot name when the coaching carousel comes around again.
And one thing, because you have been on the Saleh train more than anybody else here, and one thing that I really agree with you on is the fact that he has been able to develop defensive assistants, whether that be Jeff Ulbrich or whether that be even D'Amico Ryans in San Francisco. So, yeah, that's certainly a possibility. But my whole concern with this has never been about Saleh's defense or the fact that guys want to play for him. I know that guys here definitely want to play for him. I don't doubt that he's, very militaristic and he can build a culture. I'm just simply worried about Cam because, we all know if Cam Ward doesn't work out, this coaching staff's not going to work out. Mike Bergonzi's not going to work out. I just really want to know who the offensive coordinator hire is, and that's going to help me feel more comfortable.
Yeah, and, this past season with Bo Hardery taking over with play calling duties, we saw some flashes from Cam Ward that could lead to some potential opportunities for him to really flourish as a perennial quarterback in this league. And that's something that you kind of have to continue to build off of, but it's so hard when you make the transition from, a quarterback's coach to the OC, and now you're kind of starting back from square one. The good thing about it is when you look at Cam Ward's able to just continue to grow. And we've seen it from the high school level, the college level. I mean, he's been a 0-star recruit, and he's come from nothing essentially. And he's worked for every single down of football in his career. So that is a promising thing to look at. The other thing that I think we're all kind of a little, I'd say, concerned about would be his injury at the end of the season. I'm not sure what the update on that is, but obviously he could, come back as healthy as ever, or there might be a little bit of some twinges with that injury. So I'm not too sure on that.
Yeah, and I think that's why we all want Daboll for Cam Ward, because we've seen his ability to, and it's one sample size, but it's a good one, in Josh Allen, where he took a guy that was very turnover prone, very inaccurate with the football, and turned him into one of the league's best quarterbacks despite his play in the Denver playoff game. He tried to be Superman so much, and he has that capability, and Joe Brady was able to get this more so out of him. You don't have to be. You can be a point guard, but then when the time comes that you need to be Superman, he can do that because he's Josh Allen. I think Cam Ward has a similar feature to him where he can make those superstar plays. We've seen some of them this year, but he doesn't need to do that all the time. So I'd really like to see, if Daboll were to come here, how he could develop that out of Cam Ward.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into more of that conversation about Cam Ward and the potential next offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans. There was something I heard from Robbie and Rextra this morning that Gentry Estes said that struck a chord with who the next offensive coordinator might be. And I think you might get a kick out of this too, Parker. Right now, we are broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. We want to hear from you today. Call in, text in, 615-737-1025. Our game text line is sponsored by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. More on Next Man Up, 1025 The Game.
Yeah, so if they can't get Dayball, and again, someone else could emerge, you kind of feel like there's some urgency here. You want to get this going, and I know they've been hiring other, uh, other assistants and things like that. But if you were looking at Cliff Kingsbury, and again, that's a different offense, and then Adam Stenavich, who at least terminology wise, it would be continuity for Cam, but also someone who hasn't called plays. How do you look at those two guys?
Yeah, the calling plays thing. I mean, that is. Look, I know that's not a concern to some people, but it would be to me, especially given what just happened with the head coach you just fired. I think if Brian Callahan coming in was a highly respected offensive coordinator, but he never called plays, and I think if you can find someone who has experience doing that and has proven that he's capable and knows what he's doing, to me, that's a big deal. I know it isn't to some people, but I would like to have somebody who has called plays before. The template for me when it comes to Cam Ward has kind of always been Eric Morris, his coach, his OC in college, who ended up doing really well at North Texas this last season. And that was an offense he thrived in that was a little more wide open. And so, maybe someone that can come in and make that work. All of a sudden the Titans offensively are not the kind of team that just gets by on offense and actually starts attacking you. I don't know. I don't know. It's good. It'll be interesting to see what happens with all this. But in terms of the play calling, it would be nice to have someone who's done it. That's just me saying it.
That was Gentry Estes this morning on Robbie and Rexroad discussing Cam Ward and the next offensive coordinator. Brian Daboll is not the Titans' next coordinator. So I'm on board with that 100%, Parker, that Gentry Estes made a great point saying this next play caller or this next coordinator has to be a play calling offensive coordinator. And that's spot on because I think a lot of Titans fans right now are scared and a little bit apprehensive that this play calling thing did not work with Brian Callahan. And the fact that you had Nick Holtz as your air quotes offensive coordinator and obviously will not be retained under Robert Saleh's next coaching staff. But it's all like you want to be the coordinator, but not the head coach. And I think now that you have a Saleh, head coaches for the DC purposes, you got to have somebody solely there to help develop a Cam Ward and to help this offense flourish. And when I mean flourish, I mean you have to consistently put up numbers, 24 points at the minimum per game.
Yeah, and to add on to what Gentry was saying, Robert Saleh is calling defensive plays. He's the head coach, but he's focused primarily on the defense. So you need somebody with experience that's called plays that is going to be the head coach of the offense. So Stenavich does give me concern as well, just simply because you brought in a guy that didn't call plays before and it didn't work out. So I'm a little apprehensive about that. So that's why if Daboll is not, if he doesn't end up coming here, Kingsbury is my next choice because at least he's called plays. And I know he's not everybody's first or maybe even second choice, but the air raid that he ran at Texas Tech with Mahomes and what he was doing in Arizona with Kyler Murray, the terminology is very similar to what Cam Ward's used to, what he ran at Miami. His offensive coordinator, Shannon Dawson, came from the Dana Holgorsen tree at Houston, West Virginia. They ran the air raid as well. So the terminology is very similar. The scheme is very similar. So at least you'd have that going for him, but there are some downsides as well to it.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more onto the Cliff Kingsbury candidacy for me, I mean, looking at his stats when he was with the Commanders in 2024, through 13 games, his offense in total offense, that is, ranked 7th in the NFL. And you look at their scoring, they were 5th in scoring. And that to me is the biggest part of all this because the Titans need to be top 5 in scoring because when you have Robert Saleh as your head coach and going to be your DC, he will more than likely have your team in top 5 or top 10 rankings as a defensive coach. So that's something that you can kind of, stamp on the piece of paper and say, don't worry about that. As for Cliff Kingsbury, if you can consistently put up these numbers in accordance to the NFL's numbers here, they're also 3rd in rushing. So that makes you wonder when you have a guy like Aaron Whitecotton coming in as your run game coordinator along with your D-line coach, that is a promising sign if you were to bring in a guy like Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah, and the thing about running the football, I'd say it's a fair balance for as much as you can with the air raid. The downside is what got him in trouble in Washington was you have a defensive mind in Dan Quinn, and then you have a defensive mind here in Robert Saleh. And their focus is, all right, we can't run as much up tempo on offense because our defense needs some time off the field to rest so that they can go out there and maximize their effort. So if you're constantly running no huddle, it's kind of the thing with Josh Heupel. If his offense, when it's working, it's almost unstoppable. But when you're going 3 and out and you barely take a minute off the clock, well, your defense has to trot out there again after just being out there. So Cliff Kingsbury would run no huddle a lot. Dan Quinn didn't want him to do it as much, and he continued to do it anyway. So that's what got him in trouble.
Yeah, and to me, I think Kingsbury can get away with that here in Nashville, because if you go look at the Washington Commanders' average age on defense, it was 27 years old. It's one of the league's, most veteran-esque defenses. And again, they tried to surround Jaden Daniels with an experienced defense and experienced players that helped him get to where they were at in year one as a rookie. And I think that's why they caught lightning in a bottle. And you could say the same thing about, the Bengals in some aspects. They caught lightning in a bottle in year one with a guy in Joe Burrow. That's what a lot of teams now, when they draft their franchise quarterback, they try to reload in year one. Whereas for the Titans, you had a year for Cam Ward to develop as a starting quarterback in this league, starting every game, didn't play in all of them. He played in all of them, but not throughout the entirety of each game. It just makes you look at it saying that's his year of growth and development to learn. And he even mentioned it. I think the last day that the Titans had a press conference for players and coaches saying that, I learned about, you can't get away with certain throws and certain coverages. And I think that's just the intelligence growth of a guy like Cam Ward. It just goes to show you whoever the next OC is, he's going to flourish with him. And if it's Cliff Kingsbury, I think this team can take a massive jump into a playoff push.
And I don't know if he would use as much up tempo, because when he was in Washington, he ran it more than anybody in the league by a mile. So I don't know if he's going to run it as much in Tennessee if you were to get hired. But if you're going to even run it remotely to as much as you did in Washington, you're going to need depth. And that's something that the Titans don't have at this point in time, which makes me think that because Robert Saleh is running the 4-3, you don't have a lot of outside edge rushers. You have Jeffrey Simmons, you have Devondre Sweat, but they play interior mostly. Jeffrey Simmons can rush the passer from the outside, but you need more. You need more than just Jeffrey Simmons. So it makes me think that they're going to take an Arvell Reese or a Reuben Bain or a David Bailey with that 4th overall pick, assuming they don't trade back. You also need depth in the secondary because your corners are out there. You can't ask them to cover for 4 or 5 seconds every play. So those are 2 areas of the defense that you would need a lot of depth.
Yeah, and another thing to put into all this, when you talk about Aaron Whitecotton in this situation, he was with Robert Saleh in New York from 21 to 24. Well, before all the interim stuff happened. But you look at how he's developed, a lot of pass rushers. One of them being Will McDonald. He had 10.5 sacks in 24. Quentin Williams had 29.5 sacks from 21 to 24 in that 3-year span. And then Bryce Huff had 10 sacks in 2023. So I think we all know, as people looking at this team, that if you have your top edge rushers and your top interior linemen that can get to the ball, and I think with Jeffrey Simmons, that opens up a lot of this opportunity. And again, it helps out a guy like Cliff Kingsbury's case, because we talk about the up tempos and how it didn't really pan out in Washington. I think he can get away with it for about a year or two. And again, back to your point about the depth, this is something the Titans can definitely build through the draft. That's what is so great about a team like this, especially when you start from the bottom all the way to the top with Mike Borgonzi. This is a guy that has prided himself on building through the draft and getting young players that way. And again, if you can go grab some diamonds in the rough in the late 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds, this is where you can truly flourish. And that's something that, Borgonzi's kind of stressed, that we can do this thing. And so that's why I'm confident about this. Let's go to the phones. We have a caller here, Jared in Spring Hill. What you got for us, Jared?
I just still, the more this plays out to me, this hire with Saleh, I just question more of the Titans' decision making, because again, they're not really surrounding Ward with enough of anything at this point. I mean, we're still finding ourselves in the cycle of finding an offensive coordinator, and it just doesn't really Borgonzi was around Mahomes, and there's a draft way to build a team there. And we didn't really take the Chiefs model in developing a quarterback or a team. And then we go out and hire a defensive coordinator. How is he supposed to cater to the brand new quarterback that we got? And then, we kind of see the ugliness of what it can be with Houston. I mean, Houston had a good offensive coordinator, and they blamed him 2 years ago. And then this year with C.J. Stroud. And then now, look, Houston has a great defense, but they can't score any points, and their quarterback plays suspect. So I just feel like the Titans just set themselves up for the same cycle that they had under Vrabel, where they can't keep an offensive coordinator. There's no longevity. And in the NFL, to me, you got to have an offensive coordinator or offensive-minded head coach who is very hands-on with the offense. That, to me, is longevity now, because even if you have a decent offensive coordinator, he's going to get plucked. So, I mean, I know Cam Ward hung the moon in Nashville. I get it. But I still don't necessarily believe that, he's all these, can't be flawed and can do no wrong type either. And I just think he needs a lot of help. So,
yeah, no,
anyways,
you make a great
I'll holler
point.
at y'all later.
Thank you, Jared. I appreciate the call. Stay safe and warm out there, man. He makes a good point there, Parker, about, Cam Ward needing to still develop as a quarterback, and saying, you mentioned that he hung the moon type thing. This guy is still a young player. He's going into year 2. Again, I get where he's coming at. And from the offensive coordinator standpoint, that's the whole purpose of getting a guy like Robert Saleh, is when you can solely focus on the defense, you can hire a guy that is solely dictated on the offense. And if it's, I guess in lockstep with Cam Ward, that's why I'm so enamored with a guy like Cliff Kingsbury, is you can go grab him and he can be integrated with Cam Ward until week 18 of the next season. And again, if it doesn't work out, like Jared's kind of alluding to there in Spring Hill, then maybe it doesn't work out and you're going through the cycle again. And that's what I think he's worried about. As somebody looking at this team right now, I'd be okay with that, because you now have a foundation and baseline on the defensive side of the ball where you can go through that cycle again. I get it. Titans fans don't want to have to go through that cycle every single year. But if you can have a top 5, top 10 defense every single year, and you can somehow try to supplement that offensively, again, one of those next couple of seasons, however long Robert Saleh is here, one of those next 4, if that is the case, if they go through a coordinator every single year, one of those is going to hit.
Yeah, and to kind of bounce off what Jared was saying, we love Cam Ward. I love Cam Ward. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that he has to improve on. We're just talking about the early stages, the flashes that we've seen from him, and you drafted him number 1 overall for a reason. But in order to get out of Cam Ward what we're all hoping to, you got to hire right. And I think the NFL has shown us this year, rather, when you hire Mike Vrabel, and you were 4-13 last year with the Patriots. You were 4-13 actually the last 2 years, and you take them to the Super Bowl. Ben Johnson took a team that was drafting in the top 10 last year, took them to the divisional round of the playoff. Caleb Williams and Cam Ward, pretty similar in how they play. You could argue that Caleb Williams is probably a little bit more talented, but still, there are plenty of things that Caleb Williams has to get better at, but yet they were able to get to the divisional round of the playoffs. So it's about who you hire, who can get that out of Cam Ward. And that's kind of been the focus, because the hopes of the franchise really do rest on his shoulders.
And I have a comment about Cliff Kingsbury that might shock everybody on the other side. All right. We'll get to more of that right here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Back here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game, Nick Frazier, Parker Kelly. Hey, just want to let you guys know that tonight, Vanderbilt men's basketball is taking on Kentucky at Memorial Gym with an 8 o'clock tip-off and pregame shows starting at 7:30 on 94.9 The Fan right here on the Game Nashville Sports Network. If you're, wondering about the weather outside, I believe NES is continuing to still repair power lines. There are some people that are still without power, as I am one of them. As of an hour ago, NES has put out that at 7:15, NES teams work overnight to repair and restore power to 104,000 customers. NES and contracted line workers will continue operations in rotation, and they will remain on extended 14 to 16-hour shifts to ensure we can continue responding. So there you go. There's a lot more to that. There are about 130,000 customers currently without power, at least 189 broken poles that have been reported across their service areas, 740 line workers across the service areas this morning, and we'll add more throughout the day. NES is continuing to work. If you have a power line down or if you are having a power outage, you can always text to 637797, or you can also call it 615-234-0000. So, and you can share with that as well on social medias as well to contact them. So that's the, power outage update for some of those out there. But we were talking about before the break, Parker, the Cliff Kingsbury aspect of all this for the Tennessee Titans. I don't think there's any much of a power shortage when it comes to offensive play calling from a guy like Cliff Kingsbury. I mentioned there is I'm not saying a stat, but there's some interesting comparisons and people that he's worked with throughout the years. And you mentioned Caleb Williams. I think Chicago fans are content, I'd say, after this past season for the Bears, making it a deep run into the playoffs. But there is one person that worked with Caleb Williams in college, and I think you know who that is, Cliff Kingsbury.
Yep.
And
I knew where you're going with this.
And I'm not trying to say that's just one guy that, is gratifying in some aspects, but you look at a guy like Caleb Williams, he's worked with Johnny Manziel, Baker Mayfield, Marcus Mariota, former Titans. I mean, he actually worked with him last year with Washington. And then again, one of my favorites, Kyler Murray, who has kind of fallen off the face of the earth. But you look at all those players, they all have
good chance he'll be playing baseball next year.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
To be honest, it wouldn't be a bad option for him. I mean, Oakland, now that they're the Las Vegas Athletics, they could use him. They really could. I think it'd be a good option. I think they got Jacob Wilson at shortstop. So there might be a little bit of a rotation competition there. But going back to the Cliff Kingsbury aspect of this conversation, you look at that and you say, man, every single one of those quarterbacks have that, I'd say, air raid monster about them. The fact that Cam Ward likes to roll out of the pocket a little bit, has a slinging arm that it can just send a ball 70, 80 yards in the air. Just that raw talent that can be encapsulated under a air raid style competent coordinator. And that to me would be Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah. And the good thing about the air raid, because I did run this in college, the terminology can be very simple. It can be, compared to what Sean Payton may run in Denver, very wordy, plays. With the air raid, it's much more simplified. And again, you're able to do that because you're able to run no huddle so much. It's oftentimes can be a quick hand signal and you're getting into the next play. But again, you got to have the guys got to be conditioned in order to run it. Your guys have to be well conditioned on the defensive side as well because they're not going to get as much rest. So the terminology is very simple, though. Again, very similar to what Cam Ward ran at Miami. It's what Brian Callahan tried to do. He tried to incorporate plays from Miami's playbook last year and add his own unique spin to it. It didn't work out. Cliff Kingsbury's offense is probably a lot more similar. So that is something that you have going for you. But at the same time, TD brought this up yesterday on DVD. Cliff Kingsbury's offenses usually tend to flame out towards the end. So that's one of the concerns that I was talking about.
Yeah, and again, yes, that may be the case, but if you continue to grow with a young quarterback, I think that's where you look at the lowlights of a Brian Callahan era with the Tennessee Titans. That's kind of where Cam Ward was a big highlight because he used his raw talent and improvised. There were a lot of things that we saw from Cam Ward this past season where that play was probably busted and not going anywhere. He ends up throwing it for 5 to 6 yard gain. So that's another factor to look at all this. And I just think when you have a positive and a negative, yeah, you could have some things, but two negatives could end up being a positive, or 2 positives could be a negative. However you want to look at it. I'm again trying to stay away from the power outage, jokes. That's not a good one. But looking at just Cliff Kingsbury and Cam Ward, I think it'd be a phenomenal marriage.
It could work. I mean, I said, it could be a good consolation prize if you're not able to get Brian Daboll. And I really do believe that. And I would prefer him over Stinovich. But listen, like when you have 5 main candidates that you're interviewing and you wait for a guy and 3 candidates ended up, getting hired away by other teams. One even is going back to the collegiate level. And then another guy enters the mix and Cliff Kingsbury and Adam Stinovich, you're not always going to get your first guy. So now the Titans are, and I don't know where Brian Daboll, if I had to guess, was probably, if not second, first the whole time, other than Mike McDaniel. But I don't know where Cliff Kingsbury ranks in all this. But that's just kind of the nature of when you wait to hire a guy, sometimes you're kind of getting down the list to your 4th or 5th option.
Now let's kind of open up the door a little bit again for a guy like Brian Daboll. Obviously interviewed with Buffalo, has some similarities with the guy, and Josh Allen helped develop his career to where he's at today in a roundabout way. If the Titans were to land a guy like Brian Daboll, obviously that's the home run hire, but what could that do for the growth of Cam Ward?
I think it could transform him. I really do, because this is a guy in Brian Daboll who has legitimate head coaching experience. And now instead of having to run the whole team while at the same time calling plays like he did in New York, he's just getting to focus on the offense. And I think that's why Robert Saleh wants to bring him in so badly, is because he needs a guy that can just be the head coach of the offense. So I think what Brian Daboll was able to do with Josh Allen is, a lot of people look at Cam Ward's completion percentage from last year and know it wasn't great. And yes, sometimes Cam Ward was inaccurate with the football. But what Brian Daboll was able to do with Josh Allen to kind of help turn him around, because if you remember Josh Allen's first 2 years, they were rough.
Yeah.
So giving Cam Ward some easier completions to help boost that completion percentage while also getting him into a rhythm of the game and get him acclimated to the game faster. That's what Brian Daboll was able to do with Josh Allen. So that's kind of why Saleh, that's why he's so coveted right now.
And I'm trying to figure this out in my brain as I'm, thinking about it. Like when Daboll was with the New York Giants, Parker, and things didn't really pan out for a guy like Daniel Jones. Obviously a different style quarterback in comparison to Cam Ward. But would that not give you any concern if you're a Titans fan?
Sure. They're concerned with all these guys. Kingsbury, Daboll, Stinovich. They're concerned with all of them. But out of this group, I would feel the most comfortable with Daboll, considering he's the former head coach that just gets to focus on being a coordinator. And his track record, at least with an elite NFL quarterback in Josh Allen, his resume is a lot better. So that's probably who would be more comfortable with. And I don't think I ever doubted Daboll's, even when things weren't going well with the Giants. It's kind of the same thing we're saying about Saleh, right? I mean, who goes to New York and is successful? The Giants haven't been successful in a while. They did have the playoff run, but outside of that, they haven't been. The Jets they haven't made the playoffs for 15 years. So I think with Daboll, it's just the fact that he's going to be the offensive coordinator and he's a former head coach.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm still kind of caught on the whole Cliff Kingsbury aspect of all this because of the short success he had with Washington. Again, you make a good point about how things, and even TJ mentioned it, things kind of flame out at the end for a Kingsbury. Again, I wonder if that's more of the veteran-esque defense that was surrounding him in Washington. And then again, you look at the Arizona situation, that was just a dumpster fire. And again, I wouldn't hold that against a guy like Cliff Kingsbury because the resources, they're there, but they're not utilized to the full extent. And that's why I would give Kingsbury the benefit of the doubt when it comes to a possible OC job, which could be with the Titans. That's where I land on that.
Yeah, and going back to Daboll, I mean, he still did have, I'd say his last year in New York, he had a lot more talent because he had a rookie quarterback in Jackson Dart who there is some promise with. You have Malik Neighbors. I know he did get hurt, but you had a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson who really, really stepped up in his place. And now Robinson, is I think he's set to become a free agent. So if you get Dayball and you're able to bring in a guy like Wandale Robertson, you could probably get him on the cheap too. And considering the Titans have the most cap in the NFL, that would be a huge asset to have. A younger receiver who had over 1,000 yards last year. They had Tyron Tracy, had Cam Scadaboo for a part of the year, and still were not as good on offense. Should give you a little bit of concern. But again, it's what happens when you're down to 3.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, the free agent aspect of all this, we can get into this on the other side, but you mentioned the Titans having over $100 million in salary cap space. That could be something that would be attractive for an offensive coordinator like a Dayball or a Cliff Kingsbury or maybe Adam Stinovich. Maybe that's the wild card name. I'm not too sure, but that is a good thing to bring up there, Parker. And we'll get into that on the other side. What are the Titans willing to spend on free agent acquisitions to just make this offense a true powerhouse in the AFC South? We'll get into more of that right here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Back here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Nick Frazier filling in for Jake Lyman with Parker Kelly on the other side of the glass. Great song there, Parker, coming back.
A little Fleetwood Mac action.
Yeah.
Get the people feeling good on this cold Tuesday. It's terrible out there.
Yeah.
I remember telling my wife, when we were in Chicago, I told her I've had enough snow probably for the rest of my life. I'm good for maybe one snow a year, but other than that, I hope we don't see snow for the rest of the year.
Yeah, look, that's the difference between what's going on outside right now is that obviously the main roads seem to be pretty clear for the most part. It's the side roads you got to worry about. Again, if you're trying to drive and get out today, just be very careful getting out of those side roads and neighborhoods. But yeah, Parker, looking at this weather, man, like I'm all in the camp of if you live in a city like Chicago, New York, this is just an unfazed thing. But the ice storms are a little different. That's what is a bit concerning is because you don't know when this stuff will thaw out eventually when the sun comes out, which is out now. You're probably gonna have some flooding issues. You're gonna see some stuff that's gonna freeze back over, and that's what I'm worried about.
And it's so funny too because they're on it. Like the roads, the sidewalks, they're all salted, paved by like 5 a.m. by the time everybody gets up. And they're built for this. Their grocery stores don't freak out. But I remember telling her, I'm like, hey, in Tennessee, even if we get a threat of snow, the grocery stores are raided. Everyone's got to get their milk sandwiches. When she went to the store on Wednesday, there were no onions, chicken breasts, produce. It was all gone. She didn't believe me, but she found out firsthand this week.
Look, I consider myself having some patience when it comes to storms and winter weather like this. Today, my patience was kind of lost a little bit. Yesterday it was harped on Jason McJoe's show, and I watched a little bit of the television from the generators that if there's no stoplight going and it's just completely just out, treat it as a four-way stop. That's
the rule, right? Or that's
the law.
Common road sense right there.
Yeah, and that's what's been the most infuriating thing getting to work in the mornings is there's somebody that's driving 20 miles an hour, which again, drive with caution. I understand. But again, the main roads are fairly clear when it comes to getting here. That's what was bothering me a little bit. And I don't know if that's something I should be griping about per se, but then you go look at the four-way stop aspect of it. When the stoplight is out, you're just thinking, all right, treat it like a four-way stop. Because there was somebody that did, I wouldn't say run a red light because the light wasn't working, but did run through the intersection.
Oh, yeah. There were people on my way too that did that.
Easily could have hurt somebody. So again, drive with caution, but that's my biggest frustration right now is the people driving and clear roads, that is. But no, getting back to the whole free agent market when it comes to the Tennessee Titans, you made a point about Wan'Dale Robinson, Parker, and his market value as he is going to be an unrestricted free agent is $18 million. I don't know if the Tennessee Titans would be willing to pay a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson $18 million. I mean, the upside is that he's 25 years old. There's a lot of room for development / growth with a guy like Cam Ward. The conversation the other day was about Jawan Jennings, 28 and a half years old. His market value is projected at $22.6 million. Again, that's a different scenario because San Francisco is going to be without Brandon Ayuk because that is a whole can of worms that nobody wants to really open.
Yeah.
That is crazy. But then you look at a guy like Ricky Pearsall, who's still in that rookie deal. You have a lot of young supplemental talents on that San Francisco offense. So again, he's going to get that wide receiver one money because of the circumstances. And I'm sure there are a lot of teams out there like, Tampa Bay, for example, that, Mike Evans is on a 1-year deal. Now he's a UFA and his market value is $13.3 million. I don't think anybody's going after that minus Tampa Bay, unless there's a team like, for example, the Buffalo Bills that would want to go grab a key piece. That's something to look at. But a few other names that kind of caught my eye when it comes to if it's Brian Daboll or Cliff Kingsbury for the next offensive coordinator. And, obviously Wan'Dale Robinson's one of them. Sterling Shepard, he had some time in New York with Brian Daboll. That might be an option if Daboll is the next OC for the Tennessee Titans. I'm not saying bring back your buddies, but when you run an offense that has some familiarity with wide receivers, and that's been something the Titans have been trying to do is grab key pieces for Cam Ward to develop with. I mean, that was the whole system with Tyler Lockett, was that you bring in a veteran wide receiver that will consistently catch the ball and be smart with the football. Things just didn't work out for him here. And you wonder if you bring in a guy like Brian Daboll, the offensive line possibly is better, which means that offense will work, better, obviously better, all that stuff. But that's my biggest concern would be the offensive line and if it works under a Brian Daboll system or Kingsbury system.
Yeah. And Jake brought up the point yesterday on Next Man Up of what if the Titans draft Francis Mauigoa because Daniel Jeremiah had the Titans taking him in the first round with the 4th overall pick. And again, my question is, okay, what position is he going to play? Because you're not going to move J.C. Latham back to left tackle. You already tried that, and his natural position is right tackle. You can get out of the Dan Moore deal, but what if Dan Moore has a decent year this year? Are you going to – I don't know if right tackle is – or left tackle. It's a need, I would say, right now, but it's not your biggest. It's not your primary need. So, but speaking of free agency, you brought up Jawan Jennings. I'd love to have Jawan Jennings here. I believe you could get him and Wan'Dale Robertson for fairly cheap. On the defensive side, Alontae Taylor from the Saints is also expected to be a free agent. You just need secondary because you traded them all away this year. So, and use some of those picks that you got. Try to find some diamonds in the rough, because Mike Bergonzi at least was able to hit on what it seems like all 3 4th-rounders from last year. You trust him because early returns tell you that he's the smartest football guy in the front office right now. So you just got to let him see what he can do with the draft.
Yeah, and I'm curious when looking at, and again, I'm with you on the whole offensive lineman. I'm not in the camp of getting an offensive lineman in the first round because, again, this team cannot afford another dud if that is the case. They, I think, have to go into the free agent market and go grab a swing tackle if that's the case, because you just can't take any high chances, high risk on those draft picks, because those are valuable. I'd say probably more valuable than gold right now, even though that price of gold is going up per se. Looking at a few more wide receivers, Parker, one name that kind of sticks out to me when Robert Saleh was in New York, I think they drafted him in 23, if I'm not mistaken, with Aaron Rodgers, was Malachi Corley, a guy out of Western Kentucky, a familiar name in this area, going up against MTSU a couple years. So that is something I would look into. $960,000 was his previous AAV, so he's coming off that rookie deal. And he's only 23.8 years old. So going on 24 years old, that's something that would attract my eye.
23.8. Is that 23 years, 8 months?
I assume
6
so.
months?
Yeah,
7 months?
6-7 months. These 0.8s on years is just not it. But no, going on 24 years old, that to me is an attractive thing, because when you have a young wide receiver, again, you wonder how much of his game has grown, not being retained. If that's the case, he was with Cleveland previously. So you wonder if he can still develop as a wide receiver on this team, because if that is the case, then you might have some success. And again, that's under a solid coach team. You wonder if that was more of a Rodgers facilitated offense of a guy like that to be like almost, I'd say, a player comparison of like MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling a little bit. So that's something there. You got a guy like Jalen Coker, who's 24 years old, played with Carolina this past year, a team that made the playoff push. And then you wonder about Sky Moore as well, another San Francisco guy. Robert Saleh was there previously as their DC. I mean, his market value is not high. It's like 1.6, 1.7. That's another key wide receiver piece. Again, when you can kind of get some key pieces that are young, coming off cheap deals, this is where you got to look at for a guy like Cam Ward. Unless you want to go grab an expensive veteran wide receiver, and this team has done that countless times, and it hasn't worked out. We all saw what happened with Calvin Ridley. It was just drops galore. And I don't know where you stand on that, Parker, but I don't think a veteran wide receiver is the right answer now.
I think the thinking has to be with this is you got to get guys that are just now entering their prime, maybe in their prime, younger. You need younger because that fits the timeline of this team. But also you got to get experienced guys, because the Titans, I don't think, are in a position to draft guys that are, or not draft, bring in guys from free agency that are unproven, still a little bit raw, or just haven't found their rhythm and develop them. I just don't think that fits the Titans. So you need to go get guys that have the experience, that are proven, but also you can get for a little bit cheaper, because just because you have the most free agency doesn't mean you should, or the most money in free agency doesn't mean you should go spend it on one player. You need to go out and you need to get a lot of players. That's why I'm high on guys like Alontae Taylor and Jawan, Wan'Dale Robinson, and kind of looking Christian Kirk was the guy that I was looking at.
Yeah,
that's a guy that
$5.3 million.
you could possibly bring in, and some of these other guys, Kyle Duggar, a safety for the Steelers. That's a guy that I would be interested in bringing in. So that has to be the thinking, I believe.
Yeah, all great points. We'll get into more Titans talk later on in the show, but Parker, there's some more update on the Charles Bediako situation. I don't know if you caught this last night before you went to bed, but there is more news and more drama revolving around college athletics.
Let's get the blood pressure up.
Indeed.
Let's do it.
I know this really boils your blood for sure. We'll get into more of that on the other side. In hour number 2 of Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Hour number 2 here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Nick Frazier filling in for Jake Lyman today, alongside Parker Kelly behind the glass. Oh boy, the blood is about to start boiling, Parker Kelly, because
It started in the break.
It did. It really did. There is a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of news, but there is some updated news on the college basketball front when it comes to Charles Bediako. I was reading an article last night on ESPN. His preliminary injunction has been delayed for weather issues, obviously so. The NCAA lawyer, Taylor Askew, wasn't able to make it, so they did a video, video conversation. And the judge has extended a 10-day his 10-day restraining order again, and quote that there was good cause. So Parker, I don't know if you look at this as the NCAA covering themselves right now before the storm hits, with former college players possibly wanting back in to this money pit we call college athletics. But what do you see about this situation, Parker? Because right now I look at it as we're just buying some time.
What I really hate was it was going to be such a good basketball game between Tennessee and Alabama, and it was, because you have a great defensive team versus a great offensive team, but the focus was shifted away from that because Charles Bediako was playing. And there was a really good conversation on College Game Day before the game earlier in the day. They were talking about, why he was eligible, and I believe the conversation of, well, some of these other guys who have come over from the G League, or some of these guys that have come over from overseas and started in college, they're not that productive. But that's never really been the principle. The principle is the guys like Charles Bediako decided to leave college, go overseas. And Rick Barnes said this before the game: when you decide to leave college and you decide to go professional, you forego the rest of your eligibility. That's the decision you made. After all, these guys are making millions of dollars. So with that, you got to make big boy decisions because you're getting paid big boy bucks. So, and for him to be able to come back to school is not really necessarily the fault of Charles Bediako, because he's being allowed to do it. It's more so the adults in the room that are allowing it to happen.
Yeah, and it seems like the adults know that there's money on the table to be had, not just for the player itself, Charles Bediako, but for themselves. And that's the biggest concern, is because the NCAA doesn't have much leverage when it comes to the NIL and players playing in college athletics. They're milking out as much of the leverage as they can when it comes to just making the money. And I think that's what we're seeing right now in the whole Bediako situation.
And I'm let's be honest, none of us really know the future of college athletics because it changes at the 11th hour of every day. 5 years ago, none of us thought we would be having this conversation about G League guys returning to college, overseas guys coming back to college. We never thought we'd be having the conversation. So there are one of two avenues, though, that I see this going. One, and this is the one that's going to get most of the audience, they're probably pulling over to the side of the road right now, opening up their car doors and throwing up on the side when I get ready to say this. The NCAA keeps getting taken to court and they keep losing. And I think part of them enjoys that this is happening because they realize that they can't enforce their own rules. And there's only one way that they can, and that's if the government intervenes, which they've actually called for. They want Congress to intervene. Or this is the begin of the demise of the NCAA because it's not sustainable to keep losing in court, and the conferences are going to start governing themselves. And I have no idea how that would look if that were to happen.
Yeah, and the one thing that I am really worried about in this whole situation is how this leaks into college football and how this will leak into potential players that don't get drafted in the NFL. Obviously, when you declare for the draft, you're no longer eligible to return to college football. But say that they don't declare for the draft and they're done playing college football and they go play for like a supplemental league of like the USFL, XFL, UFL combination. And so the requirement is if you make $60,000, and I'm reading on it right now for the UFL, if you make $60,000, it is basically saying that you are a professional athlete for that professional league. So my thing is, with the era of NIL, and I don't know how much you can kind of get away with this when it comes to the UFL, I wouldn't be surprised if there are certain people out there that play in the UFL that are not playing in college athletics because they say, oh, after their sophomore or junior season, you know what? I think I'd have a better opportunity and be able to make more money at the UFL aspect and be able to develop that way. I doubt that's the range people are going at. But if that is the case, you take a big pay cut of a salary and you're getting under $60,000, but you're making your money back in NIL value. that makes you wonder if that's a little loophole for college athletes. Say, you know what? The UFL didn't work out for me. I didn't take 60,000. Again, you're now declaring that you are a professional athlete with UFL. I wonder if some legalities of that change to where you can go back to college athletics.
The loophole for, I mean, there are always going to be plenty of loopholes, but the loophole for Diego Pavia in his case was, okay, well, I played JUCO and that shouldn't count. And if you don't allow me to come back to school, you're hindering me from making the money that I could be making off the NIL. So that there are several loopholes, but I'm going to give credit to Jake because I thought that this was something that I never really thought of. The next thing that I see this happening in, because it's happening in basketball, I think football is a little bit more clear cut on the rules of leaving college and going professional.
Right.
And it's a lot harder because in basketball, you could be one and done and transition to the NBA and just be just fine. Football, it's a lot harder to do that because you have to spend at least 3 years in college before going pro. So the next sport I see this happening in is the Olympic sports, probably college baseball, because, you know, you can go pro. I don't know the rules on that. When you can go pro, you can go pro at a high school.
Yeah. So here's the deal. In professional baseball, you could be drafted out of high school and you could be basically that team that drafts you in Major League Baseball holds the rights to you. So if you end up like Kyler Murray, for example, was drafted by the Oakland Athletics, decided to play college football and forego his eligibility to go play in the Major League Baseball. Now, again, Oakland Athletics still, or now the Las Vegas Athletics still own his rights. So if he were to somehow leave the NFL, he would probably be able to go play for the Athletics. Again, that is all still up in the air. You look at guys like, I'm trying to think of, Michael Jordan ended up leaving professional basketball and playing for, I believe, the Barons, if I'm not mistaken. So which is a minor league baseball team. He foregoed all that to go play baseball. So I mean, that's something to look at with all this. But yes, when you are drafted out of high school or college, those professional teams hold the rights to your name, image, and likeness in a roundabout way.
So even if no more G League players decide to come back to college, the door is open. So the door is open for really any and everything. The Pandora's box is open, and you don't know where that's going to lead. And that's the scary part to all of this. So, but credit for, I really think this is going to be interesting because Alabama, they play Florida on Saturday. And Todd Golden was asked about all this. And he said, we'll just go out and beat them anyway. So I think that's going to add a lot to this game, which makes me really excited. But the fact, it just does not surprise me because how convenient is it that we have this Southern region winter storm and his TRO is extended 10 days. It's so convenient.
Yeah. And I kind of want to go back to the football thing this real quick because there are a lot of different football leagues. If it's not in North America, you have the European League of Football, which is also played in, I think, France, Italy, Spain. There are a lot of American football leagues in a lot of different European countries. And it makes you wonder if that's another loophole for, again, I wouldn't say the quality of play and the professionalism when it comes to those leagues is top notch to where it's at college and JUCO and so forth. But yet that's still, to me, another loophole for athletics to be saying, or college athletes to come back and say, hey, I'm coming to play for a college athletic program because this is definitely not it. And again, they'd be able to make their money, go see the world, do whatever. But that's, I think, another loophole into bringing back to college athletics.
Yeah. And this could all be stopped really at the door if coaches didn't do it. It's kind of like with the faking injuries thing in football. Just stop doing it and the problem's solved. Just stop doing it. Just have a little bit of integrity. I know that's a tall order nowadays. But, it started with Scott Drew at Baylor, bringing over James Najee from the G League. Or, Nate Oates, allowing Charles Bediako to come back. That's more so an indictment, I think, on the coaches and the schools for letting this happen, knowing better, knowing that should not ever really be the case. We shouldn't even be having this conversation. And I tell you, when Charles Bediako got to the floor on Saturday night versus Tennessee and he got a standing ovation, I was sick. I was so sick to my stomach.
Yeah, it's an aggravating feeling and an aggravating thing to see. And that's why looking at this landscape of college athletics, that's where you kind of look at it and say, well, we have now entered the deep waters of chaos. And I think we're only going to go deeper. And the only way to go back to the shallow end is find some sort of regulation. And I don't know what that regulation may be. If it does involve, government bodies, then go ahead. But if not, then you really got to figure it out. And I don't know if they really have the answers right now.
And that's the thing. Like in a perfect world, if you would have asked me before pre-NIL, pre-transfer portal, if I would want the government as far away from sports as possible, as humanly possible. But now, because of all this, because of the wild, wild west, we don't know what's going to happen. We need some sort of order. And I believe I talked to a former FBS coach about, if college football were to get a commissioner, or if college basketball were to get a commissioner, if college athletics were to get a commissioner, how would that process work? And he kind of explained it to me that, okay, you have to go through the Power Four conferences, you have to go through school presidents, coaches have to get on board, and all of this. And it just seems like a long process that would just be a lot more waiting. And we really don't have time to wait because things need to be fixed now. So I don't know. The only answer to me seems we need collective bargaining. We need actual enforceable contracts. And I believe that collective bargaining would bring that. And if the government were to step in, that would help with that.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on college football there, and there is something I saw, Parker, that I think you might be rejoicing with your hands up in the air that would actually make college football fans a little bit more happier. Something that was changed last night, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Coming up next right here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Back here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game, Nick Frazier, Parker Kelly. I was telling you before the break, there's some, I wouldn't say big news in college football, but some potential rejoicing news in college football. The ACC has decided to move their conference championship time to noon on Saturday on championship weekend instead of their regular time, competing with the Big Ten around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock on the start time there. Is this a win for college football fans, Parker, or is this a signal for other dominoes to fall?
Well, the reason they did that was because the Big 12, they moved their kickoff time to Friday night. So in order to get a standalone game, that was the only window that was available. So I think it was a smart move by the ACC, smart for the Big 12. I mean, they would be standalone regardless because they're standalone on Saturday mornings, but now nobody has to compete against each other. But I heard a proposal about, the future of the playoff because, bowl season has always been super special to me, but even I can't deny that it has lost his meaning a little bit with the expansion of the college football playoff. I did see a proposal of kind of what Vanderbilt they wanted to do, play a 13th game. So in order to save kind of the meaning of bowl season, having a couple bowls played, probably like 5 or 6, be played on conference championship weekend as a 13th data point to get in the college football playoff. And I think that would add a lot more meaning to the bowl games, make them more relevant for, some of the more casual college football fans and add a little bit more excitement.
Yeah. And, the whole rumored this past season with Vanderbilt playing a 13th game in Hawaii. And you make a good point there. I would like to see some form of like a play-in game or just to give another data point for the committee because Jake has mentioned it and you've alluded to it as well. The games in November matter a lot more than the games in August. And if you can kind of, again, I think backloading your schedule in college football is a huge plus. If you have a team that can withstand the competition and withstand just the injury toll, I think it's a huge plus for I'd say a team in college football, especially in the top 15 for rankings.
But the real win for college football, and I actually thought this is where you were going to go with this, was the fact that they're keeping the playoff at 12. Because if it were up to me, I was fine with the 4. I would have been fine with 6 or 8 team playoff, but I don't want to expand it anymore beyond 12 because to me, my college football worldview has always been, how can we place as much importance on the regular season as possible? The regular season has always been the most important part of college football to me, and the national championship and the fact that we get a crown of champion has always been the cherry on top. So I wanted to place as much emphasis on the regular season as possible. And I was worried that, okay, if we expand this thing, now teams can afford to get in November when things are heating up the most. You're playing your rivalries. You're in the thick of conference play and be like, I can rest my starters this week. I have 2 losses. I can afford another one, or I have 1. I can afford, like if I'm Texas, I can afford to lose to Texas A&M right here. I can rest my starters. That's always what I was worried was going to happen. And we kind of saw that in the playoff, allowing Tulane and James Madison. Oregon was playing their 3rd strings in the second half in a playoff game. So that's what I want to avoid at all costs.
Yeah, and the reason why I mentioned at the end of the question to you at the start of the segment about the ACC, if this is a win for college football, or is this a signal for dominoes to fall? And what I meant by that last part of dominoes to fall is that you mentioned bowl games have lost their gusto a little bit. I'm in the camp that conference championship games have kind of lost their gusto a little bit. We saw the Alabama-Georgia matchup. That had zero significance to it because Alabama got mollywopped, and they're over here saying, the committee's saying that, oh, no, that they had enough to get into the college football playoff. No, I disagree. If we're not going to use that as a data point, then why have these conference championship games? So to me, I wonder do you see it as the ACC keeping up with the times, or they're just a late to the party?
What do you mean by late to the party?
Late to the party, meaning changing their championship weekend window of when they start their game at noon. Because again, if you're changing your schedule, I get it's all money revenue for TV purposes. But if you want an actual key data point and you're changing it for everybody to see, what good does that do if that game means nothing?
Well, I just think it shows you that they did not. I think it was the right move because it makes sense to play your conference championship when there's not another game going on, especially this year. I mean, let's be honest. we were all more focused on Ohio State and Indiana more than we were Duke, Virginia, if we're just being honest. So with the Big 12 moving their championship game to Friday night, it just makes sense for the ACC to move to noon, which I would do the same if I was Commissioner Jim Phillips. So that's where I think we are. But no doubt, like, used to be, if you won the SEC championship, like, man, like, that is almost the pinnacle. Or if you were to win the Big Ten championship, like, man, like, that means you've had a heck of a year. Now it doesn't mean as much, which it really pains me to say.
Here's my proposal for college football to change. And if you get away from the conference championship games, I'm cool with that. Keep championship weekend, but supplement it with something else. And that to me would be, you get rid of the Big 10, Big 12, ACC, SEC. You're just going to have a regular season conference champion. That's how I would look at it. And if there's a two-way tie, then you base it off head-to-head. If the head-to-head is equal, or not head-to-head off those teams if they didn't play, I mean, then you have to base it off points for, points against, whatever the stipulation may be to differentiate that. But I would replace it with how at the beginning of the season in college basketball, they do the ACC Big Ten Showdown or SEC Big Ten Showdown, whatever. Do that with as a wild card weekend, sort of, with college football. So if the SEC's number one team that won, the SEC conference in regular season go up against somebody else, or if it's the final four spots, because this past, I'd say, playoff, if it were me, I would say Tulane and JMU would have had to play in a wild card play-in game to get into the playoff, if that were me, because that suffices the rule of a G5 team gets in, but we actually see which G5 team is actually good enough to get in. So then you don't have the whole Duke, Virginia situation that you had at the end of the season. So you're going to have one or two play-in games for that 11-12. That 12 seed is going to be a playing game between two G5 schools. And again, that brings in more revenue. That brings in more eyeballs, because what the conference championship games are to me is a social hour. If you have a tailgate party at your house, what's on TV? The conference championship games. All that is bragging rights for your friend that's the fan of Indiana or the fan of the Big Ten championship from last year, Ohio State. That's all these are. They're just gloating tours to have something going on in the background. To me, I say go away from them, put in play-in games, take your regular season SEC champion, and call it a day. Because more than likely, you're going to have more TV revenue from those play-in games rather than your conference champion games.
That's kind of been a discussion point if they end up expanding this thing, which I think is coming in the future. They may just be staying at 12 right now, but that's because they're so – you want to talk about a true social hour, these debates on expanding the playoff where – the SEC and the Big Ten, they're meeting with everybody down in Florida. That's a social hour because they were getting nothing done. They were just meeting to say hello and then go on their way. But if they were to expand this thing to 14 or 16, that's when I think we start to see the structure to conference championship weekend change. And what I mean by that is, okay, you take your SEC and your Big Ten standings because they are the big boys in college football. And the teams that finish 1 and 2, they would get put in the playoff. And then you see 3 versus 6 play in a play-in weekend, 4 versus 5, and that still keeps things relevant because November is the heat of conference play. That still places urgency on the games, all while putting the urgency on conference championship weekend. The style has just been revamped or reconstructed.
Absolutely. We'll get into more of this on the other side, especially you mentioned Greg Sankey and this college football playoff staying at 12 teams. That to me, the 12-team format, that to me, there's more to this than people think. And that's just my assumption, but we'll get into more of that. We want to hear from you, by the way. Our phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Call in, text in 615-737-1025. I want to hear your opinion on the college football playoff and the landscape of college football going forward. And to give an update right now on NES, with the whole electrical outages. As of 14 minutes ago, NES put out a statement on their Twitter saying at 10 a.m., NES restored power back, tackling areas affecting the largest number of customers first. We understand being without power is difficult, especially when conditions outside are extreme. Regardless of where the customer lives, everyone in our customer base is important, and our line workers are working hard to restore power for every customer. No one will be forgotten or left behind. However, utility prioritization practices are to restore the greatest number of customers first. The numbers here, let's see, the current many areas outages of 1,000 customers or more include Brick Church, North Nashville, Bellevue, West Nashville, Hendersonville, Elysian Fields, Madison, Rosebank, East Nashville, Goodlettsville, Forest Hills, and Brentwood. And the numbers here as of 10 a.m. 230,000 total customers who lost power. As of right now, 93,473 customers with power restored, and 527,000 customers still without power, 740 plus line workers, and 207 broken lines total as to date. So there's your update of NES and their power outages working efficiently to get everybody's power restored. If you are in an area where you do not have power, seek your local shelters and get some warm food and water or warm drinks in you to stay warm in these cold times. Again, we're here to kind of help cope with that situation. If you're listening right now, right here, we'll get to more college football stuff on the other side. 102.5, The Game. Back here on Next Man Up, a phenomenal tune from Parker Kelly, running great music back there today. I feel like anytime TD's in, he always gets the deep cuts. This one hits. I love this song. You mentioned during the break when Chase McJoe had their question of the day of that one song that you'd go listen to in concert. This one would be it right here, Mr. Brightside. Phenomenal song. I believe NSC plays that at a lot of their home games as well. So
the Bills play it. Michigan plays it. Popular song.
It is a popular song, man. Absolutely. Another popular topic right now is college football and just the landscape of it, the college football 12-team format. And we'll get into a little bit of some Darius Mensah here as well. But, I mentioned before the break how this 12-team format is still considered, I guess, the best right now because of the deadline that was not met between Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey. I believe they had the final say. They had to get their votes in. And because they didn't get in for a certain deadline, they were forced to keep that same 12-team format. And to me, I think it's genius on their part, but it's also, I can understand why college football fans would be frustrated if they wanted a expanded format. Because Greg Sankey, again, I don't know Sankey personally, but if I were him I'd say the commissioner of the SEC would be frustrated at how this college football playoff unfolded. You go back and look at the college football playoff, bracket. I mean, the matchups I get were, I wouldn't say lopsided in the first round, but you had Ole Miss, Tulane. People have seen that before. But the seeding, to me, you have two SEC teams matching up against each other in Alabama, Oklahoma, and then 8 and 9 matchup. And then you have Ole Miss and Georgia matching up in the following round. So that solely left one team to be able to go on to the next round, and that would be more than likely Georgia. And they did, and they got mollywopped. So I wouldn't say they got mollywopped, but they did not lose. They did not win against Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is the ones that got mollywopped following that. So that is the issue. If I were Greg Sankey, is you want to make sure the SEC is still the dominant conference. And that's why they said, you know what? I'm not going to give an answer. We're going to keep this as the same thing as it is. We want to make sure we assert our dominance for the SEC next season and make sure we have more than what we had already. And that is just a pure, just physical strength of teams competing at a high level.
That's why the SEC was in favor of 16. Meanwhile, the Big Ten, they wanted 24. And those are the two conferences in charge of, Petitti and Sankey are the two primary people in charge of how is this format going to look in 2026 and beyond. So Sankey was openly in favor, as were a lot of other people, were openly in favor of 16 teams. Meanwhile, the Big Ten was very staunch on going to 24. But the reason that Sankey wanted the 5+11 was, okay, you get your 5 highest ranked conference champions, and then you get the 11 at large. The reason they want that truly is because they know that when it comes to the rankings, the SEC would have gotten 7 teams in the field because if you add Texas and Vanderbilt and the 5 teams that already got into the 12-team field. Meanwhile, the Big Ten, they got Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon.
Yep.
And that second tier of the Big Ten this year was off with Penn State, with Michigan,
Illinois.
Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan State. They used to be in that second tier. Now they've fallen off. So they got 3 into the field. Basically, they want the peace of mind knowing that if we do this auto bid structure, we're guaranteed to get this specific amount of teams from our conference in the field. So that's the discrepancy really behind the two.
Right. And that's what I meant by that when saying they were content with leaving it at a 12-team. That's why they didn't get their vote in, is because, look, there's still more money on the table to be had. And if you continue with this 12-team format, and we even spoke about this, it was Jake and I and you along with it last Tuesday, about the patches, the logos on jerseys and the fields. These teams can make so much more money with having this extra revenue. And when you add that extra revenue, then you're potentially adding a playoff game into it. That adds more into the contract stipulations. And if you stick with this 12-team format, that makes you have to restructure it when it comes to a 16 or a 24-team format. There is a lot of business minds going into the college football aspect to all this. And that's why I think it's genius. I look at it as more of a reverse Uno card with Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti, saying that they wanted to expand it, but you know what? 12 teams, we'll just have to rough it out for one more year.
And that's what you're talking about. There's a lot of drive-by leadership in college football. And what I mean by that is people that they stop by they make decisions because they know that they're not going to be here in 5 years, and then they leave the sport worse off than it was. Because what do we truly love? What do college football fans truly love? And that is the tradition, the pageantry. You go to a game on a Saturday in the fall, in the home game, you see all the tailgating, you see the fans and their chants, and that's what makes college football so special. When you infuse these rules of, transferring from school to school, and a player can be on, you take a TJ Finley, for example, and that's a wild example, a dude that's trying to play for his 7th school. I mean, that just, you can't graduate doing that. And then you throw money. And to be honest, like, guys, I'm 24 years old. I don't always know what I'm doing. What are these kids who are 18 and they're making millions of dollars? Do you expect them to know what they're doing? They don't, and they got the wrong people in their ear. So that's what they're doing, these decisions that are slowly just eroding the sport.
Yeah, and then it comes down to the coaching aspect of all this, because you got guys like Kirk Ferentz, I'd say Kirk Signetti, add him into this equation. Definitely Clark Lee into the situation. They're grabbing veteran players in these NIL portals, transfer portals, that is, with this NIL money, and those guys are graduating, and those guys are basically going to bigger and better things after college. And I think that's the format you have to use, is grabbing veteran guys and making sure they graduate, and making sure it's not just a one-fold thing where it's just all about sports, when you can also worry about, the graduation aspect of this with your education. So there's a lot of different nuances about this format, and especially with college football, but also college basketball we talked about in the first segment. So kind of want to make a transition here, looking at the recent settlement, and that comes to Darius Mensah, the quarterback from Duke, making getting to an agreement, settling on an agreement to be able to transfer out, and possibly going to Miami. It's expected for him to go to Miami after his dispute with Duke. And what are your thoughts on this, Park? Do you think this is good for college football? Is this bad? I mean, he's transferring inside the conference, so that's not a great thing to see.
Yeah, I already don't like that. I already hate when players transfer in conference, especially when they transfer to their rivals, because I know Trevor Etienne was a running back at Florida, transferred to rival Georgia in conference. It's a rival. It just disgusted me. So I already hate the fact that players transfer in conference. But what I hate more so about this is he signed a deal with Duke, 2 years, $8 million, was supposed to get $4 million a year. And I know contracts really don't mean much other than the sticky note that I have back here. It doesn't mean much. So him signing this agreement, and then also after the season was over, announcing that he was going to come back to school, and then at the 11th hour decides, hey, I'm going to enter the transfer portal. And Duke's like, hold on. You can't do that. You signed a contract with us. And Duke is going to have lawyers. They're going to have good lawyers at that. So what I really hate truly about this is, I understand why Duke attacked this so hard, because it's the principle of, you made a commitment, you got to stick it out. And that's what a lot of us were taught. But also, too, at the same time, if I'm Manny Diaz, if I'm a teammate of Darian Mensah's, I wouldn't want to play with that guy who tried to leave. Why would I want to play for him?
Yeah, and looking at the current transfer portal window when it comes to Miami, there is a lot more going out than there is coming in, Parker. I mean, as of this morning, looking at some of these recent, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. I mean, they're 20, 21. Holy cow. Like, this list goes on and on and on. It's honestly well over 20. It's well over 25. It could be near 30, 31. I mean, this list continues to go on and on and on, but there's more going out from Miami than there is coming in. And you got to remember the recruiting aspect of this. I mean, you're obviously going to go grab some more players, but again, the window is now closed. College football is at a limbo, and it just, again, frustrates all of the coaches and programs, because this window needs to be changed. And again, this is why you're having all these settlements, because this is a guy that obviously is going to win, which he did win a settlement, because of the whole window thing. And that's just, again, we talked about earlier with loopholes. You're going to find a loophole in every situation, and this is one of them.
Yeah, and Darian Mensah, like, the reason Miami, I don't really have any concerns about what their team is going to look like, because Mario Cristobal has proved that he recruits at a very high level out of high school. They have the Gatorade Player of the Year coming in for their offensive line, and Jackson Cantwell. And then you add what they're able to bring in the portal. Like Darian Mensah is a really good football player, and he could be a first-round quarterback in the future. So I understand wanting to go get Darian Mensah, but at the same time, he signed the deal with Duke, and it's kind of like the Damon Williams situation. Like Jed Fish came out and said, "Hey, Damon Williams is going to have to earn the trust of his teammates back," and he has a lot of work, because imagine what's going to happen after he throws that first interception, even if it's not his fault. Imagine how the fans are going to react. Imagine how his teammates are going to react. You tried to leave us, so it's not going to be pretty.
Not at all. And just looking at some of these guys transferring out of Miami, they're going to, I mean, some are going to the SEC, some are, I mean, it's all over the place because it's college football, it's across the nation. But looking at a lot of this, it doesn't look like, Miami's going to be recharging in some aspects. Again, you alluded to, Mario Cristobal being a really good recruiter, but a lot of these guys leaving, you're just thinking, all right, they're younger players, as in sophomores and freshmen, which I understand. And maybe Miami's just cutting the fat off the roster and doing the route that, Indiana did along with Vanderbilt and a few others, grabbing veteran proven talent. And again, I think Cignetti has cracked the code with this in grabbing those veteran players and paying them off of their proven talent and not off expectation, which is kind of what some of these Power 4 schools are currently doing. And example of Alabama and so forth.
And it's the philosophy of get old, stay old. So he likes the guys, and he's talked about this. And to be honest, everybody looks at what Curt Cignetti did to Indiana, and it's I think it's the best story ever in the history of college football up to this point. But you look at what he did, and you're like, man, like, what's his secret sauce? Like, how in the world do you turn Indiana into a national champion? How do you do that? And I've listened to Curt Cignetti talk about this because I'm just fascinated by it. And there's really not anything special. It's he goes and he gets guys that have produced. And the thing about this is, if you're a good football player at the FBS level or in the group of 5 or at the FCS level, if you go to a bigger school, a bigger and better school, you don't forget how to play the game of football, but you're surrounded by more talented players. So that can force you to kind of elevate your game. And plus, you're kind of in conjunction with more talented guys around you. So what Curt Cignetti focuses on is they practice for like an hour, 45 minutes, and then they'll have 2, walkthroughs. He doesn't expect his coaches to, work until the wee hours of the morning, then come back in 5 a.m. running on like 7 cups of coffee. But they're so detailed in every single thing that they do, and that's how they get the results that they do. It's really simple.
It is really simple. And there's something else simple. Well, not really simple, more complex. There is some news in the NFL that has just broke, and it involves the Buffalo Bills. We'll tell you on the other side right here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Back here on Next Man Up, there is some breaking news in the NFL. The Buffalo Bills are signing Joe Brady to a 5-year deal as their new head coach, as Josh Allen and Joe Brady continue their offensive marriage in this game we call American football. So what does that mean for the Tennessee Titans? Could that mean Brian Daboll is on his way to Tennessee? What does that mean to us here, Parker?
Well, if you remember Diana Rossini's report from last week that if he didn't get the Bills job, that he would be coming to Tennessee. Now, my only question is, how much does the Raiders interview change things?
It's true.
Because you'd get the opportunity. They also have a lot of cap space. You'd get the chance to be a head coach. Once again, your second stint. Another question that I have, do you want to go to Las Vegas to do that?
Look, I look at this Las Vegas job as a job that will be open in the next 2 seasons. Again, that is enough time for a coach like Brian Daboll, who came off of his rough stint with the New York Giants and could basically rehabilitate himself in Tennessee. And under a coming off of his rookie year of Cam Ward, that's something you could look at. And maybe if that's the case, then you could possibly see that job opening up in Las Vegas, and he could go over there and maybe, if that is the case, if they do draft Fernando Mendoza, that's the opportunity. But again, head coaching opportunities don't come open often. So if that is the case for him, then go ahead. I think Clint Kubiak's name is still out there. I don't know if he is one of the candidates for that Raiders job, but if that is the case, that might be an option for him as well. I mean, looking at Brian Daboll, if it is the case for him to come to Tennessee, guy has done a pretty good job with the Buffalo Bills. They were the 31st passing team near the bottom of the table when it came to the season that year in 2018, and they finished 9th in rushing. And to me, that is a huge component to an offense, especially in the Tennessee Titans, that I've harped on countless times this past season when Callahan was trying to revitalize the offense to be a pass first, then run second. You can't go away with something that has been working perfectly for you in the last couple of years. Run first, then pass. And I think we saw that in the second half of the season when Mike McCoy took over, along with a bunch of other things that unfolded with Bo Hardigree taking over as the offensive coordinator. They were a run-first team again. And that's just something that you bring in a guy like Brian Daboll. Sure, you're going to have that awesome throwing mentality with Cam Ward, but you're still going to have the true basis of running the football.
Yeah, and quarterbacks have many best friends, and one of those is having a good run game. So obviously, if you're able to sustain the run game, and I'm interested to see what happens because I do expect Tony Pollard to be back next year. I expect Tajay Spears to be back, but I'm interested that if the Titans, if they're going to go maybe acquire another running back, whether that be the draft or whether that be through free agency, but what Tony Pollard was able to do towards the back half of last year and how well the offensive line played, the hope is that continues so that you can help your young quarterback develop, because when he started to have that good run game, that's when we started to see Cam Ward start to take steps in the right direction. So you're right about that.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more context about, the potential of a guy in Brian Daboll to come to Tennessee in 2019 when he was with the Buffalo Bills and working with Josh Allen, they continued to make, signs of progress on offense. Then you go to 2020, they ranked second in scoring at 31.3 points per game. That's something the Titans need to have. And I kind of made the case for Cliff Kingsbury. Again, that was the case if Brian Daboll was off the table. It is well open now that he is still on the table for a possible OC job and also a head coach, because you made a good point about the Raiders. But again, you average 31.3 points per game as a Bills coach. I mean, come on now. That's pretty impressive. And second in total yards. That is something that you have to add into the equation of this is a high-octane offense. If you can be top 5 in the offensive ranks and still be top 5, top 10 with the defensive ranks, this is, a team that can put themselves in a playoff conversation before the season even kicks off of next year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm going back to, the Bills hiring Joe Brady. I wonder, because they were giving a lot of say to Josh Allen. The front office made it very clear that, hey, Josh Allen is our Super Bowl window is only going to be open as long as Josh Allen is in his prime. So they gave him a ton of say in this decision. I saw reports that he wanted to work with Daboll again. I also know that he liked Joe Brady because Joe Brady was able to get a lot out of Josh Allen. In fact, he won the MVP while Joe Brady is your offensive coordinator. So I wonder if this was the guy that he preferred over Dayball.
Maybe. I also look at the Joe Brady situation as, I don't want to say a casualty, but if things don't work out with Joe Brady as the head coach, again, they signed him to a 5-year deal. And let me just backtrack a little bit to set the scene. You go look at a guy like John Harbaugh, who waited forever to sign with the New York Giants, and that was a 5-year deal. And again, it's like the wide receiver market a handful of seasons ago with A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel, where they were the ones kind of setting the market for that position value. Again, this is the head coach market now. John Harbaugh was the one that set the value for everybody else to follow suit. You look at Robert Saleh, who was with the Tennessee Titans, signed a 5-year deal. You look at Joe Brady, who is now on the cusp of signing a 5-year deal with the Buffalo Bills. So all these coaches have 5-year deals. That is the similarities between each one of those. So again, that's something to keep in mind. And as for the Tennessee Titans' sake, if Daboll is to come to the Titans, you wonder what that contract year looks like and the marriage with Cam Ward in that offense.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
So looking more into this, Joe Brady, you mentioned there, kind of getting back to that, I kind of got off track there, but I look at this as a casualty because, if things don't work out, they can go say bye-bye, and I'm not sure what the numbers are on this contract, but if it is something substantial, then keep him around, see if things work out. And the pro side to all this, because he's young, you can use him as like your Sean McVay. And if I'm not saying he's the next Sean McVay, but if that does work out, you have him for a long tenured time. And it kind of follows suit in the Pittsburgh and the Baltimore Ravens thing where they hire young and keep for a long time. Now, as of recent, Mike McCarthy going back to Pittsburgh, not really a young hire, but an experienced hire. So you wonder how that all plays out. But this does put Buffalo in a bit of a somewhat of an upgrade. There are highlights that it is an upgrade, but again, it's a little bit of a lateral move because that defense is still there. Like, I don't know what you're going to do with that defense. Again, I'm wondering where this all takes place for a guy like Josh Allen.
Yeah, that's my question too. Is okay, you hired Joe Brady, and maybe they just needed maybe the message was getting stale with McDermott. I don't know, but you weren't able to get over the hump with the staff that you had, so you promote from within. Which, okay, if this is the guy Josh Allen wanted, and he was able to get the most out of Josh Allen, okay, but the defense was still a massive problem. So you got to get that figured out.
Yeah, the Buffalo Bills remind me a lot of the Kansas City Chiefs, just trying to patch a lot of the holes and see if they can get through the playoffs. And again, this past season with that defense, there were a lot of holes. I mean, there were a lot of passes that were given up into those little pockets in the defense that should have been kind of patched in the best way to describe it, and it just wasn't. So you wonder how Joe Brady attacks the defense going into this offseason. Obviously, they'll have a plan to secure all that, but you're going to be drafting later in the first round and second rounds because of where you ended in the playoffs. So it's going to be a tough one to really decipher for this Buffalo Bills offense and defense, that is.
No, I agree. So I'm interested to see where this goes, and I'm going to continue to look into some more of this hire at the break.
Absolutely. We'll get into more of that in hour number 3 on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Next man up, 102.5 The Game. Nick Frazier filling in for Jake Lyman alongside Parker Kelly behind the glass. Broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. Our phone and text lines are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com, 615-737-1025. As we continue to react to the recent news of the Buffalo Bills on the cusp of hiring Joe Brady as their next head coach on a 5-year deal, which is possibly a telltale sign that Brian Daboll is still on the table and could be potentially the Titans' next offensive coordinator. So this is just a lot of craziness going on in college football, and the NFL. I'm intrigued because now I was all on Cliff Kingsbury in hour one, Parker. Now that Brian Daboll's name is still on the table, this is another reason why could go back and look at him as the option.
Yeah, it's always been him and Mike McDaniel for me as the guys that I'd want for offensive coordinator. I would have been fine with Arthur Smith. I would have been fine with Bobby Sloak because Bobby Sloak worked under Kyle Shanahan, and I love the offense that he ran in Houston year one. But since those guys are off the board, there's really no point in talking about them. But now with the three guys, it's really been, and it seems like it's been this way with the Titans, is we're waiting for Brian Daboll. We're going to see what's going to happen. And now with Joe Brady getting hired as the next head coach of the Bills, this is a big domino that needed to fall. And you really have to do what you have to make sure of is Vegas. Vegas is what stands in your way because, like you, they have a lot of cap. They actually have the second most cap in the NFL. They have the first overall pick, which they're most likely going to use on Mendoza. How enticing is that to Brian Daboll? That's something that you got to be cautious of.
Yeah, I'm curious, Parker. Is it Brian Daboll or bust for the Tennessee Titans at this point, now that they have checked off the box of the Buffalo Bills?
I think Stenavich, given that Saleh in that year where he was fired from the Jets and went to San Francisco, he made a quick pit stop in Green Bay, and that's how he met Stenavich. So I think Stenavich is a very real candidate for this. I also think Cliff Kingsbury is very real, but from the looks of it, from 50,000 feet, it looks like it is Brian Daboll or bust just because they're waiting so long for him. And now that this news has happened with Joe Brady, you got to go get him.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about the report Diana Rossini put out last week. If he does not get the Buffalo Bills job, it seems that he would be the next Titans offensive coordinator. And also, to that point you mentioned about the Las Vegas Raiders, I'm torn because you know where I stand on this Raiders job, Parker. I like it a lot. I think any coach that goes to Las Vegas, it's a win-win situation because you're going to get somebody better than what Pete Carroll was doing last season, and that's running it back with Geno Smith and eventually adding Tyler Lockett later on in that season. So that they have a lot of young core pieces. You got, Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty, potentially Fernando Mendoza is the number 1 overall pick. If that is the case, again, you can build off those core pieces. Again, that's also, you got to supplement on defense and see what you can do there, but you can carry your offense with those core pillars. If you're asking me, just get decent offensive line play, at least have 3 or 4 seconds in the pocket, and you're able to just build off of that. And whereas you look at the Tennessee Titans, you got decent offensive line play between Dan Moore Jr. and J.C. Latham. You wonder how much of a factor that puts into it. I don't know what you think about this, but is that a factor for Brian Daboll? Is the offensive line a factor for the development going forward with Cam Ward or potentially Fernando Mendoza at quarterback?
Yeah, when you're looking at the Titans job versus the Raiders job, I think you can't run it back with Geno Smith. It proved that last year with the turnovers and how he was seeing the field, that his time in the NFL is quickly coming to an end. But you do have Brock Bowers, which is a pillar. You have Ashton Genty, but outside of that, there's not much. You're going to have Fernando Mendoza, and what we've been taught from the NFL, specifically I'm talking about this season, is you get the right person in the room, you build the right coaching staff, and you can have success, and you can have success very quickly given the amount of how much you can overhaul the roster through the draft and through free agency, especially with that much cap space. So if I'm Brian Daboll, I'm looking at that, and yeah, that is enticing, but also it's Vegas, and their track record has not been great historically over the last, this decade, in this, century. So we got to see. We got to see.
Indeed. We'll get into more of this on the other side right here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Back here on Next Man Up, a lot of stuff unfolding. According to Adam Schefter, it looks like the Tennessee Titans are set to hire former Giants head coach Brian Daboll as their next offensive coordinator, contingent upon him not getting the Raiders head coaching job. So, again, we were talking about it last break, and it just seems like it's either the Raiders or the Tennessee Titans. And if things end up falling the right way for the Tennessee Titans, it looks like Brian Daboll might be the next OC for this team.
If you listen, or if you're going to listen to, go back and listen to our show, just cut out anything that we said from like 11:15 before that, because we were talking about hypotheticals, and we don't need to talk hypotheticals anymore, because Brian Daboll is going to be the new offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans. The gamble of waiting paid off.
Look, this Tennessee Titans team, they've been known to do a little bit of back and forth, and it seems like this time it definitely cards. They were, if they were playing blackjack, they were definitely dealt the perfect 21. So that is, I guess, good news here for Titans fans. You mentioned earlier, Parker, we were talking about potential options for free agency additions, and you mentioned the name of Wan'Dale Robinson. And again, that's a former Brian Daboll wide receiver in New York. You wonder if that is the case when it comes to $100 million plus in salary cap space for the Tennessee Titans. His current projection on overthecap.com is roughly $18 million. Obviously, the upside is 25 years old. Would you consider that at $18 million?
Absolutely. I would absolutely consider Wan'Dale, because I feel like you need young receivers. You have a little bit of a core with Alec Eomanor and Chim Dike, but to be honest, you need a true number one, and I don't know if Wan'Dale Robinson is truly a number one, but he's definitely a high caliber number two. You still need to go out and get that elite receiver, but Wan'Dale Robinson, having him in the room certainly helps. And that is a guy that and again, I don't have any like inside knowledge on this at all, but I would expect the Titans to push hard to get Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yeah, and another name to add on to that too, and I'm not trying to keep reiterating former Giants on this, but again, this might be a glue guy to this wide receiver core, and that's Sterling Shepard, a guy that spent some time in New York, also spent some time in Tampa Bay recently. He's roughly 33 years old now. I mean, that's somebody you might be able to add on to this equation. But again, the familiarity with the Brian Daboll offense to help grow and continue to get players depth-wise, because we talk about depth, and more likely the depth needs to be on the defensive side of the ball, which is going to come from the Robert Saleh brains of adding. But this is all good signs for a guy like Cam Ward when you're trying to develop good talent. And you being a former quarterback, when you see an offense that you like to run, especially if it's now a Brian Daboll offense for Cam Ward, how much of that would you just be salivating at the mouth as a quarterback?
Well, you trust him, because if he was able to do it with Josh Allen, he should be able to do it with you too. So if I'm Cam Ward, I'm ecstatic about this, because I'm getting a guy with prior play calling experience, with prior head coaching experience, and he gets to be my offensive coordinator, which is what the Titans needed. The Titans didn't need a guy who had never called plays before. They didn't need a guy who never had offensive coordinator experience before. They tried that with Nick Foles, and look where that left them. So you needed a guy with that experience, and you bring in Brian Daboll. So if I'm Cam Ward, I'm really excited about what he will be able to get out of me, and I would trust him, and I would listen to him, and I could see this being a great pairing.
Yeah, and looking at just his time in Buffalo, working with Josh Allen from 2018 to 2021, I kind of gave you a few little tidbits here and there, but looking at that 2020 season, just having 31 points per game on average, and second in total yards with 396 per game, and third in passing overall in the league, to me, that is the most reassuring feeling as somebody that I would say has a similar play art to, I wouldn't say to Josh Allen, but the similar intangibles of a mobile quarterback. And that, again, you didn't have that with Daniel Jones. That might be a little bit of a knock with Brian Daboll. It might just be because of the system and how the quarterback reacted to it. But again, I think you could put Cam Ward under the Josh Allen category of mobile quarterbacks, which is a promising thing going forward.
Well, Cam Ward is certainly mobile, but he's one of those guys that, when he would scramble, he'd more so scramble to throw rather than scramble to run, which is
right.
not necessarily a bad thing, but there are also times where you got to know, like, hey, There were several times I'd watch Cam Ward, and particularly in that Colts game in Indianapolis, where you just take off, you go pick up 5 yards, and you keep the chains moving. But he would try to make a play, ended up missing a receiver, and then boom, it's 4th down, and we got a punt. There are times where you just need to pick up 5 yards, and you're not asking Cam Ward to scramble for a 60-yard touchdown. That's never what you're going to ask of him. But he is capable of making plays with his legs, and I think Brian Daboll is going to help get that out of him where, hey, it's 3rd and 5. The sticks are out in front of me. I got some green grass. I'm just going to take off and get the first down, keep the chains moving.
Yeah, and you wonder how Aaron Whitecotton fits into this equation, with being the new run game coordinator / D-line coach with the Titans. You wonder how much of a system this fits for him. So, I mean, that's something to put into the equation as well. Saleh is slowly adding to his coaching staff. If this is the case for a guy and Brian Daboll to come to the Titans offense, but phenomenal how this is all unfolding for Tennessee. And again, you made a good point. You kind of push all your chips and you gamble on it, and it's kind of working out for them. So, congrats. I guess prematurely congrats in a roundabout way. But this is a good sign for things to come if you're looking at this Mike Borgonzi, Robert Saleh marriage as a 1-2 punch.
Yeah, and Diana Rossini was right, because if he didn't get the Bills head coaching job, she said the most likely destination was Tennessee, and that proved out to be the case. So I want to know also, too, because you can't completely ignore the Raiders factor in all this, that they gave him a head coaching interview. So I wonder how much of this decision was, okay, I want to be an offensive coordinator for a year, see how it goes, or I want to be an offensive coordinator, kind of build up my resume again, and then take another head coaching opportunity when the time is right. I wonder how much that thinking factored into this decision for Brian Daboll.
Yeah, you make a good point there. And also to add on to the equation, and you mentioned it during the break as well, how Joe Brady and the GM in Buffalo have a very tight connection together as well. And that, I wonder how much of a factor that played too.
No, it reminds me of the Dallas Cowboys situation where you let Mike McCarthy walk, and it wasn't necessarily the same situation as how the Bills fired Sean McDermott, but you let Mike McCarthy walk, and then you promote from within, you take a gamble, and you hire Marty Schottenheimer, who is one of those offensive minds, but the defense was lacking this year under Matt Eberflus. So with the Bills now, okay, you hired Joe Brady, so you're going to keep the offensive terminology the same. I'm sure the coaching staff, a lot of those guys, at least on the offensive side, will remain. So that's familiar for Josh Allen and company. But what about the defense? Because the defense was a huge problem in Buffalo.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, this past postseason, this was a playoff push that the Bills needed, per se, if they wanted to win a Super Bowl without a Mahomes and a Joe Burrow, and they just didn't capitalize on it. I mean, I think Josh Allen utilized every single asset of his game to get them over the hump, and it just got to the point where they just couldn't do it anymore. And again, you could go back and forth on the Brandon Cooks catch or not a catch or whatever it may be, but again, that game probably shouldn't have gone to overtime because you missed, I believe it was Dawson Knox for a wide open touchdown late in the game. So that's something to play a factor into. To give a little update on the NFL head coaching landscape, Adam Schefter tweeted this out. Bills with Joe Brady, Steelers with Mike McCarthy, Ravens with Jesse Minter, Giants John Harbaugh, Falcons with Kevin Stefanski, Dolphins have Jeff Hafley, Tennessee Titans wrapped up Robert Saleh, and that leaves 3 open head coaching gigs, and that's the Cleveland Browns, Arizona Cardinals, and the Las Vegas Raiders. Who do you think out of those final 3 that do not have head coaches would be the following hires on that, Parker?
The follow, I have no idea. I know, I think there was interest between Seahawks offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak and the Raiders. I'm not exactly who all they've interviewed. With the Browns, we were talking in the break. Nobody wants the Brown head coaching job, and you can't really blame them because the Jags OC, Grant Udinski, withdrew his name from consideration. So it really seems like I think they're down to 3 finalists, if I'm not mistaken, one of which being Nate Scheelhaus, the passing game coordinator of the Rams, which he's not looking to take the next move to coordinator. He's making the jump to head coach, which I believe Scheelhaus is a rising star, but at the same time, Cleveland's kind of in quarterback hell right now with the Deshaun Watson contract, and you have Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. So all of that has got to be figured out. So that's a tall task. And then Arizona, I really think they're the ones getting screwed in all of this because they're just waiting. And I do not think they're going to end up with a really good candidate.
Yeah, you make a good point about Nathan Scheelhaus and how he wants to make that jump from being just a quarterbacks coach slash coordinator to head coach. And I wonder if with Jim Schwartz, if he is the front running candidate there in Cleveland, because nobody really wants that job. And then maybe the Cardinals go grab a Nathan Shieldhouse, who's an up and coming name, because they can take a chance on a guy like that right now because they don't really have much to build off of, minus their two core pieces on offense with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. Because again, you have an aging backfield in what Michael Carter, Zonovan Knight, James Cook, or not James Cook, excuse me, James Conner. I mean, and then Kyler Murray's probably not going to be their quarterback much longer. I mean, that's a deteriorating offense that has some young core pieces, but not enough to really grab anybody. So again, that could be something to where Arizona grabs a quarterback or something along those lines and builds a name for themselves. And as for the Raiders, again, it is if Brian Daboll doesn't accept that Raiders job, if something opens up for him, then he'll be the OC for the Titans. So that is something on the table still. It's not signed, sealed, delivered, but it's potentially imminent.
And I didn't know this, but Brian Daboll he completed a second interview with the Raiders. Adam Schefter put out about an hour ago that he could just completed a second interview for the Raiders head coaching job, and yet he still decided to take the Titans OC job. So that should tell you a lot about how much he wants to be here rather than be a head coach.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it is still contingent upon him getting the Raiders head coaching job. So, I mean, it does look like the Titans are set to hire him. It just depends on that Raiders gig there. So we'll get to more of that. Just talking about Titans recently with the news of the Buffalo Bills hiring Joe Brady as their next head coach from inside the building on a 5-year deal. And according to Adam Schefter, the Titans are now set to hire former Giants head coach Brian Daboll as their next offensive coordinator. Again, still contingent on the Raiders head coaching job. We'll get into more talking about the Titans and potentials with Brian Daboll going forward right here on Next Man Up, 102.5 The Game. Back here on Next Man Up 102.5 The Game. Yeah, what is Brian Dable doing? Is he going to make up his mind or not? That's a great pull there, Parker. That's hilarious. Again, we're broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the recent news with Joe Brady being hired as the next Bills head coach on a 5-year deal, and the possibility of Brian Daboll being the next Titans head coach? It seems to be the set higher there, depending on that Raiders gig. So we want to hear from you. 615-737-1025. It's just a continuous cycle of questioning. And it seems like our text line right now, there is a lot of people that are still hopefully he does not take the Raiders job. And some people are saying right now, Caleb on the text line, if we have to wait again for Daboll, I'm out. And that's just interesting. He just doesn't want anybody else to take that job per se when it comes to Daboll. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Are you out if you just have to wait a little bit longer, Parker?
Well, we can't take our victory lap quite yet because you got to root that the Raiders do not offer him the head coaching job. And the fact that he did complete his second interview today does give me a little bit of concern. But I don't think that necessarily means that you're out on Daboll. More so, you just got to root that the Raiders, if you're a Titans fan, hope the Raiders do not offer him the job.
Yeah, and more on the text line here. Justin in Hopkinsville says, I needed an ink or blood before I can get too excited. I'm with you. You can call this like the Wolf Pack.
Speaking on behalf of all Titans fans right there, Dustin.
Indeed. 8576. Every coach who gets a quarterback first overall tends to be fired. So, again, not sure how you look at that because Daboll is a offensive coordinator in this aspect, not necessarily a head coach. That would be more on the Robert Saleh aspect of it. But again, I am on the camp of if you get a second head coaching gig, and I'm not sure what the numbers, I'd have to look it up, but just off of my gut instinct, if I'm Robert Saleh, this second time go around has to work out. Like if I am him, I'm grabbing every single resource possible to make sure this works out. And if you're able to land a Brian Daboll as your OC, that on paper would be, yeah, I'm grabbing every resource possible to make this thing work for me on round 2 of a head coach.
And I started thinking about this too with the tight end situation because, Gunnar Helm being a young guy, I think he's going to be the future of the tight end room. But Chig, there are ways in which Daboll utilized his tight ends. I'd love for the Titans to bring back Chig on a relatively cheap deal because we know Chig is not the best blocker at tight end in the NFL, but there are ways he led this team in receptions, if I'm not mistaken. So there are ways that if you get him the football in space, he is an athlete and he can make things happen. So I'd like to see how, if you were to do that, what that could look like. Also, too, have you heard the rumors of Kyle Pitts?
I have not.
Apparently, there's a rumor out there that the Titans may be interested in Kyle Pitts. I have no idea how much that's been validated or where I saw that, but I'm more so focused on Chig.
Yeah.
I'm more so focused on Chig than anything else.
And you make a good point there about Chig Okonkwo that Titans do have a decision to make with him. I think we've seen enough out of Chig Okonkwo to come back next season and to be a vital asset to this offense. And looking at Gunnar Helm, yeah, there's a lot of high potential with him. We saw later on in this past season with Cam Ward, they started using that tight end position a lot more. And, that one touchdown that Chig Okonkwo had, I believe it was against the Saints, if I'm not mistaken. And so you look at that and say, yeah, there's flashes of promise with a guy like Chig Okonkwo. Again, he didn't get the strongest of starts to his career, but you put him in the right offensive game plan, I think he can flourish. And again, when the Titans drafted him, they were trying to find the Jonnu Smith replacement. And that was the comparison. And they had the opportunity to draft a guy in Isaiah Likely out of Coastal Carolina, the tall, lanky tight end that's become the second fiddle in Baltimore behind Mark Andrews. Now you kind of have those more beefier, stockier tight ends, but that are still versatile in the passing game, the run game, so forth. You got a guy like Gunnar Helm, who's still a beefy, stocky tight end, but can catch the ball, have a lot of yak yards along with it. I think the Titans have a 1-2 punch when it comes to the tight end position. They just have to utilize it properly. And I think possibly under Brian Daboll, that could flourish like on a tremendous level.
And the most important thing about Chig is what he is. You know that he's not the best blocker, but he can make things happen if you're able to get him the ball in space. And I thought something that he really improved on last year was reducing the amount of drops. Because if you remember the year before, the season before, Chig was dropping balls left and right. That's something that he really focused on in the offseason. And that's something that you could tell was reduced by a significant margin this year. So again, I don't know Chig's future because he did post something on social media that made me think, okay, he's probably not going to be back in Tennessee next year. But he's a guy that I would look at bringing back on a cheaper deal. And with Gunnar Helm, I don't think there is anything elite about Gunnar Helm's game, but I think he's pretty good at everything. He's pretty good at blocking. He is a safety blanket for quarterbacks, and he has pretty good hands. So that is something that you can build on going forward, but also you need to have that second punch, the 1-2 punch in the tight end room.
And that's what I was kind of getting to, is that there is a lot of high potential with both of those guys, even though Chig is kind of, looking at a potential different deal. And that's the case of, I think we've seen enough production. And to the point about your Kyle Pitts take there, like Dustin in Hopkinsville on the text line, he makes a great point, and I agree with it 100%. That's a lateral move for Chig, and he got injured. Yeah, he got injured. I don't know if Chig's ever been injured. I say keep Chig right now. Now Pitts' ceiling is current where it is. Huge. It'd be huge. He awoke at the end of the season. If I got another gut feeling for another year. That was a little weird wording there at the end there. Sorry about that, Dustin. But yeah, I'm with him. I think it would be a lateral move and might as well bring back familiarity rather than somebody different with almost the same skill set.
Right. And Kyle Pitts really, we saw him start to blossom this year in Atlanta after not doing it his first 3 years. It took him a while to get going, but do you trust the Titans organization to be able to keep that going? That's the question.
I would say so. I mean, you have Luke Stocker, who's on staff right now. I believe he's retained. I'm not
Yep,
sure.
they retained him.
So then that's a huge. I
believe
plus.
he's a good tight ends coach. I really do.
Yeah, he had a pretty good career, and now that he's a coach, I think it adds a different level to just teaching those tight ends. And plus, that position in general in the NFL has changed tremendously with the likes of Travis Kelce. I mean, you've had in the past Jimmy Graham, who's a different breed. I'm trying to think of some other Tony Gonzalez. Like you've had Jason Witten, Greg Olson. Those guys were more the block first, then pass. But Kelce has kind of transcended that position. So again, you're seeing more of those versatile tight ends. This is a good point for the Titans, and I think they bring back Chig Okonkwo for another season and another deal, that is, and see what they have in them, because I think under Brian Daboll, this offense could be completely different. And again, they could be clicking on all cylinders like a well-oiled machine.
That's the thing. Chig Okonkwo is kind of that Swiss Army knife. Again, they're just athletes and good. The best offensive coordinators, they have a certain style that they want to run, but they realize too that, okay, if this roster best fits this certain scheme, then I'm going to do that. You got to adapt it to the players that you have rather than trying to make the players fit into your scheme. So if you see that Chig Okonkwo, if we just get this guy, we dump off a screen to him, we hit him on this 5-yard hitch, we hit him on this 5-yard out, and just let him go, then that's what he needs to do. And I really think that I would love to see Chig Okonkwo in a Brian Daboll offense.
Yeah, and adding on to the whole tight ends conversation, you look at the way the Titans, and I mentioned this earlier in the show and previous shows as well, when you go to that run first option of just making sure you ground and pound the football, that opens up your passing game so much, especially the play action game. And again, when you open up the play action game with two tight ends that are versatile like that, that is where you're going to see them flourish. That's why I'm so excited about this upcoming season for the Tennessee Titans, where you can grab guys like that and just transcend your offense to a different level.
Right. And I would love to see, a guy like Wandale. That's why I want to see Wan'Dale Robinson so bad. And I'm gonna bang this drum over the offseason until it happens. Bring in a guy that's familiar with Daboll's scheme. That's what the University of Tennessee is doing with Jim Knowles, right? Jim Knowles runs a defensive system that is pretty hard for guys to learn in their first year. So that's why they're bringing over all these Penn State transfers, guys that are familiar with the scheme that can help some of the other guys who have never experienced playing in that system before, help them get familiar with the terminology. So if you bring in a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, who's worked with Daboll, you bring over some other guys that Dayball's probably worked with in the past, that'll help everybody get acclimated more quickly to the offense.
Yeah, I mean, he was ranked top 10 in the NFL in receptions with 92. Yeah, he was ninth in ranking on that. And then everything else, I mean, top 15 in yardage this year, had 1,000 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, and averaged 11 yards per catch. So, I mean, that's pretty decent for a guy in Wan'Dale Robinson, and especially for the circumstances in New York right now. Just with I wouldn't say the lack of direction, just like the lack of I guess, help and resources. So there's a lot more opportunities outside of New York for a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson. And again, that's why his market value right now on Spotrac is 18 million. And that's understandable. Whereas if you look at a guy like Jawan Jennings, whose value is roughly $22.5 million, that's where you look at it as like, that's the situation he's in because of all the other dominoes that are falling around him. Whereas for Wan'Dale Robinson, you probably can, negotiate that number a little bit more. It's a little more wiggle room because he's not really tied to a New York right now because of, having Malik Neighbors come back from his ACL injury. So that's something to keep a factor of. We'll get into more of this right on the other side, right on Next Man Up 102.5 The Game. Another great tune from the Parker Kelly. I mean, Chris Brown, T-Pain, can't get any better. That's the best way to wrap up a Tuesday show right here on Next Man Up. Appreciate Jake Lyman for allowing me to fill in for him alongside with Parker Kelly. Parker's done a great job behind the board. Wrapping up the show, discussing a little bit more about the potential of Brian Daboll to finalize a potential deal with the Tennessee Titans. I mean, if this does happen, Parker, this just catapults this team into a different tax bracket, if you ask me.
Yeah, no, we're all rooting for Daboll to not get the Raiders job. That is the hope right there. Nothing has been finalized. All I saw from Adam Schefter is that he is set to become the Titans head coach pending that he doesn't get the Raiders job. So now we just sit and wait again.
And looking at a lot of Bills fans right now, just reading what they're saying, holy cow, they are just in an uproar. Obviously, there was that 50,000 petition vote for them not to get rid of McDermott. And now all these Bills fans are just upset they hired Joe Brady from inside. It goes to show you that this franchise is just not listening to their fan base. And it's unfortunate because you have a top-tier quarterback in Josh Allen that they're thinking his talent is being wasted with having a somewhat of an incompetent offensive coordinator, which I think Joe Brady's a young mind that just needs to be, retooled a little bit.
Well, people are saying the same thing about Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, right? They're wasting the window that they have on offense because they're so poor on defense. But with the Bills, what I can't understand, it's kind of the same situation for Dallas. Like, you have a higher expectation among your fan base, among your organization than most teams in the NFL. So if you're firing a guy who's led you to so much success, but then promoting from within, isn't that kind of the same thing?
Yeah, a little bit. I'd say so. A little bit. I mean, would you say the same thing, that it is probably the same thing? Because I think it might be.
Yeah, and I kind of equate it to, while this is kind of different, completely different, rather, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin steps down. And with a guy like that, I don't think you should ever fire Mike Tomlin just because that's a Hall of Fame coach.
Right.
He's done so much for your organization. He's beloved by the players. He decides to step down, which I think was the best case scenario. But at the same time, too, what's the standard in Pittsburgh? And that's winning Super Bowls. They have 6 Super Bowls, which is tied for the most among any franchise in the NFL. So that is their standard. By making a lateral move, and it might even be a step down as well, and Mike McCarthy, like, what are you trying to get at here? I don't understand what the Bills are trying to get at here.
Look, looking at the Pittsburgh situation, I think it's a lateral move when you go hire a guy like McCarthy, and it's just stability. I think it's a lateral move for stability. You look at the Bills' job, I think it's another lateral move for stability because this Bills organization is still trying to figure things out. The 5-year deal thing, that's saying we're pushing our chips in the middle, which is kind of crazy to say, but that's what they want to do. If they want to go hire a guy like Joe Brady, go ahead. So it's all up to how he produces as the next head coach of this Bills team, because Josh Allen, again, somebody had to be a casualty, and they had to use McDermott, and hopefully Allen and Brady can continue somewhat some success, that is.
Yeah, and it just, if you listen to that presser with Terry Pegula, their owner, they were looking for a scapegoat, and it's really unfortunate too, because I know that they never really got over that hump, and I forgot the terminology that he used, but they never got over that hump to get to the Super Bowl. But you point to one dot on the timeline, and that was the Denver loss that had so many bad calls towards the end, and that's unfortunate if that was the reason why you fired Sean McDermott.
Yeah, because Joe Brady's the one calling the plays, and you just think, well, if there's anybody to really point fingers at, it'd be him.
And you could even point to Josh Allen too, who at the time was playing like the best quarterback in the league, but he had 5 turnovers. So
yeah,
I didn't really hear him getting much blame.
Let's go to the phone lines real quick, sneak in a call. Dustin in Hopkinsville is called in. What you got for us, Dustin?
We got 10 minutes. Okay, yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
10 minutes till 12. So what's McDermott doing now? Has he decided to take a year off or what?
That's a great question. I think he's just
I think that's the belief right now.
Yeah, just taking a year off.
He doesn't see value in the Raiders or Cardinals and the toilet bowl up in Cleveland. So I think it's ignorant myself. I texted that in this morning. Like, so you fire a head coach that gives you just years of winning seasons with the same quarterback. And then you turn around, you start interviewing Phillip Rivers, all right, out of nowhere. I mean, it's kind of neat, I guess. But then you hire within his offensive coordinator, his staff, like he was the problem, yet you elevate his problematic staff. That's what I'm hearing. And it just goes to show that a lot of these billionaire owners are just ignorant, and they get lucky a lot of the time, and they hire one right guy that starts making decisions. They like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And then that guy just starts hiring. And once they put their hand on it, implosion. And, man, the Bills were bad for a while, and the Detroit Lions were, and I feel like the Bills just did us a favor. Everybody in the AFC, I think they're going to waste Josh Allen. They're going to be right there on the edge just because his talent elevates them. But you got to separate head coach and quarterback, in my opinion. If you run a business, the manager to the top employee the top employee doesn't need to be making decisions. He can talk to my manager about what he wants, but that's silly. And for Daboll, you know, the Raiders job with Mendoza, as corny as he is, and as much as I couldn't hardly stand how corny he is, I like the guy, good Christian guy, but there's only so much corny I can handle. Tom Brady's there, and he is larger than life. And, buddy, when something happens he doesn't like, he's going to put his hand on it, and that's a catch-22. That could go really well for you. You just sit back and get him coffee, or, you know, that could go really bad. So if I'm Daboll, I don't think I want Oakland Raiders' job. No matter – unless Mendoza is just the next thing to slice bread.
Yeah, I appreciate the call, Justin. That's a great point there. You know, looking at that Raiders gig, yeah, what does Tom Brady have to say on those final say decisions if that is the case, if it is Mendoza? And to the point of the quirkiness of Fernando Mendoza, I think that's more of his draft stock. I think you'll see a more lax version of Fernando Mendoza if that is the case with the Raiders, because I think that's – I mean, look, you looked at the Heisman Trophy awards. That was all just – I wouldn't say vanilla, but it was just very clear cut. Everything was all structured, cookie cuttered stuff. You go after all the post game interviews, the national championship, it's all cookie cutter stuff. So again, I think that's more of just draft per se, just all the draft talk. But as for the Raiders job, yeah, I don't know. That might be something to look at when it comes to Brian Daboll, because if you're a coach, you're not wanting to go for your second stint and say, well, if I don't have final say in a lot of this stuff, why should I take that job? Again, that makes another opportunity for this Titans OC job to be more attracting. And also to that point as well, maybe after 2 seasons, if that is the case with the Raiders and they end up wanting to move off of the current coach or whoever their next coach is, and Brady's like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore, or not do this anymore, but like with this coach, then Dave will say, you know what, maybe that is the job. Maybe we can negotiate something where I can have more say than what you think. And again, I think it's more trial and error for Brady than it is for Brian Daboll right now and for Vegas.
And with Las Vegas, I saw an interesting story on ESPN about a couple of weeks ago that talked about, you know, the say that Tom Brady has within the organization, because he is a minority owner. And I believe the number I saw was 5%. So a 5% minority owner in the Las Vegas Raiders, but his role really extends beyond that 5%, because the guy that he wanted in last year's coaching cycle was Ben Johnson. They didn't get Ben Johnson. And then so they go out and they get Pete Carroll. And then Pete Carroll brings Geno Smith with him. So that didn't work out. And then now, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So I think Adam brings up a great point with that too. That's, to me, if I was a head coach on the second leg of my career, my second stint, and I'm trying to rewrite the ship,
yeah,
I'm not sure if Vegas is the place I'd want to do that.
Well, maybe Chase and McJoe have all the answers to these questions that we brought up. Parker, appreciate you helping me out here on today's Tuesday edition of Next Man Up. Chase and McJoe coming up next right here on 102.5 The Game.